Hey everybody, welcome to the stream. Just drinking a glass of water there. Stream begins shortly. No, stream's happening now. Nice wood bowl for these dice. So, we were working on this yesterday. If you guys recall, this was part of a larger effort. We're learning about drawing ferns, and we're learning about drawing corrugated steel siding on the side of industrial buildings. Industrial buildings, as we talked about yesterday, are typically kind of a giant piece of infrastructure for putting buildings into the building, for putting machines into the building, machines that do the value addition process that creates the output that is the reason you have a factory in the first place. You use a giant crane to move these around, and so the superstructure of the building is actually just this big crane that goes down the whole shed and back on a track. Sometimes that track is geared, sometimes it's like a big rail. It just depends on kind of like the giant crane manufacturer that you talk to architect your building, because you don't talk to architects about this building, you talk to engineers about this kind of building. The siding of these buildings is just corrugated sheet steel that's been folded in a bendy corrugated pattern, which is just bolted to more steel infrastructure on the internal side. These buildings are much more like sheds or barns than they are like human habitation buildings. They're just to keep the elements out. They're not really to like keep it all climate controlled. It can get incredibly hot or incredibly cold in a factory or warehouse building like this because, why insulate the industrial process? Like the process is what's important. The temperature of the building is not super important. So you end up building with this cool material. We have been kind of working up towards a Papercraft plan here, the Filter Fern Bank, which is a sort of cement bucket that has soil in it, and then these super tall ferns that are growing in it, and then this corrugated steel on the back of it that's kind of supporting it. These will serve as both walls and also as kind of like air filters inside of this larger factory that these salamanders built in this fantastical papercraft environment that these guys are kind of like living in. So, brings us back to here for now. We have the ferns, we have the front and the two sides here of the box. There's a top here. We haven't filled in the ferns on the sides. We haven't really messed with the top at all. And then on the back side here, we have the start of a pretty even layer of corrugated sheets. They've been installed in an even manner, but they've rusted in an uneven manner. That uneven manner is something that we've been basing off of this photograph. What you don't see in this photograph is that on the screen that this photo is on, which this small thing reproduces, this screen within a screen reproduces, I actually have some sticky notes sticky noted to the screen, and I've just been moving them down and kind of doing one, matching these one to one with the rust that creates them. So unfortunately I can't kind of put my finger over the thing, but perhaps I can like come in at an angle with this and give you guys kind of a more precise. So we're basically on the panels that are right below here that are just above the rightmost window in that middle single 3 windows in a row window. It's right above that third one, not in line with my pen, but in line with like the corrugation. So it's mostly dark rust, but then it bursts into kind of the top third of it is light, and then there's this really bright light part here that we're going to get to in a few panels. So the dark spots are reproduced here. That previous big patch of white is reproduced here. And so we're starting back into another patch of white. We'll get probably to that third patch of white here. And then we'll probably end up in like the mixed zone over by the middle of these windows by the time we finish this out. Because I'm just matching one of the sort of 10-foot by 3-foot panels of corrugated steel that's in the photograph with one, this is nearly 15 scale feet, I guess 12.5 scale feet with a 2.5-foot base of these corrugated panels kind of gridding together. And so I'm saying that kind of each one of these panels is 2.5 feet wide, and they are each this long, but they have rivets, either rivets or bolts or something, but connectors of some kind, fasteners of some kind that fasten them to the internal structure, kind of halfway down. But yeah, so they're about 10 feet tall, and they're about 2 or 3 feet wide, so they're same proportion as these, so it's a pretty, well, not quite the same, but like definitely within an order of magnitude, and absolutely like close enough, 10-20%. So that's pretty good for taking a real world thing and reproducing it essentially at like a cartoon scale of pen work. So we're not going to get to this yet. We're going to do some warm-up. The warm-ups have been good, right? Like a couple streams ago, the warm-ups produced all of this stuff around the edges, in addition to this one kind of carboniferous lepidodendron like block of a super tree. That's that. Warm-ups over here have been good. This is how we kind of got back to excuse me, our fronds and stuff. So now we're on Sunday. I'm just gonna start by re-outlining how we've been drawing, I guess, the technical system that we built last time in the last stream for how to accomplish all of this really nice rust, but using kind of a limited amount of ink and lines, because there's only so much space, and this pen only gets so thin, and this kind of constraint interpretation is an important part of how you make the art. So we'll get to it. I already have on this on my screen here, on this other screen, this thing all ready to go. So I'm just gonna go ahead and just do like a test sketch of literally the next panel that we're gonna work on here. So the method that we kind of derived from trying a bunch of different versions of drawing these panels yesterday is that it's important to capture the sort of hue of the rust, and we accomplish that actually with the second step of cross-hatching that kind of alerts the viewer to just how much the rust has kind of spread across all of these surfaces, not necessarily as individual patches of really bad rust, but more just a uniform kind of turning that's happened that creates big fields of rust. So that's the second step. What we're actually outlining here is the first step, which is to capture the real kind of highlights and lowlights of the corrugation pattern that both the weathering reveals, but also just the natural corrugations of the material produce valleys and mountains and valleys and mountains, and there's a little bit of a shadow from the angle of the sun and things like that, and like maybe not necessarily a shadow, but a change in distance, and so we have to kind of pick and choose, because we only have the one tool and really the one motion. We have to pick and choose out of all of that kind of combined value of the rust and also the weathering and also the really dark patches of rust and the kind of visual tricks that the corrugation plays to try to like bring that down to just a couple sets of lines. And so this kind of broken line thing to emphasize parts that are particularly dark because they're kind of like in shadow and light and shadow and light, and then when you go over with a field of cross-hatching underneath them, they strike you as sort of more interesting than the rest of it, and so a darker hue, a darker value. But then also the lack of these emphasizes places where essentially our kind of comic camera, in the sense of something that is recording our view into the sort of comic version of the world, the drawn version of the world. Our camera, our perspective into it. Sorry, I should have drunk more tea or coffee before I started, or water. Water's good too. Just got a dry throat. I haven't gone outside yet today. I ended up kind of not having enough time this morning. I just didn't make time this morning to go for a walk outside, and that's bad on me. I feel like, as soon as we're done here, I'm basically going to go for a walk. I feel like I said that last stream, too, that was how I started the last stream. So we kind of have to pick our battles on the vertical corrugations, but we can really come back in a couple of extra strokes on the shading here, this cross-hatching, to get a couple different layers of value. I've also been working off of this kind of technique, this watercolor technique, that was, I was visiting my parents right before our current times, so early March, and my mom has been a professional artist for a long time, so we get to talking about art, and it's a really good set of conversations. But she was discussing the idea that a book that she had read, or a famous painter had expressed this notion, but or there was a school of thought, perhaps, but in watercolor, there's an idea. It might have been a Japanese or Chinese school of thought on how to do watercolor. That in watercolor, you're basically only ever going to display, you should only ever display 5 layers of value. I didn't really dive into exactly what the implications of that are in watercolor. Watercolor is a medium I've used before, but it's not my specialty. Penwork is definitely my specialty. But I take it as the notion, right, that this is absolute white and this is absolute black. Not quite, right? I mean, absolute black is like way down here, and absolute white is way up here. But that 5 is inclusive, right? And so I guess what I'm aiming for in trying to do this work is to have the darkest part, we'll call that a 5, because it ends up being sort of 5 layers of cross-hatching, down to 1 or even a 0. This ends up being the amount of sort of hue layers that we can show, right? Serious cross-hatching, dense cross-hatching, relatively loose cross-hatching, very loose cross-hatching, almost nothing at all, nothing at all. And this isn't just cross-hatching, this is just line density, really. I mean, you don't even have to do this with cross-hatching to get the same value effects, right? I mean, like, none of these lines are going to touch, but just based on density, I am going to end up at around a 4 here. Right, there's no cross-hatching because there's no hatching and there's no crossing, right? These aren't hatches and they don't cross each other, but I've achieved the same darkness. And here I would do it by actually just filling in every single one of these lines, right? This implies a kind of like broken grid of these little angle guys. Well, I'm just going to fill that grid entirely in. And then this implies that there's dots in every single surface. And so I'm going to dot the whole grid. And now we're at 5 again. You know, if I wanted to do a 1, this would be like a mist of strange grid powder. And be up here. This would be a brightly lit piece of grid stone, something like that. That's our 3, and yeah, I mean, might as well. Yeah. So this is the technique that we're using. We're basically taking the fields of value and hue here, and the highlights, and especially the shadowy, the darkest parts of the rust and the weathering patterns. We're making the dark parts be complex, broken, but like densely broken parts of this. We're making the very light parts of the vertical marks. We're making the very light parts just an absence of vertical mark, which it's implied that these all continue, because once you see a whole field of this material, you quickly realize, right, this is what's up, this is the deal. And then that second layer of diagonal hatching to get the big area effect, there's just a subtle amount of going back in, and, well, it's not subtle, it's like pretty blatant, but doing a second pass, making these marks in here, jumping from kind of 3 to 4 on our kind of gradated scale here, you can get all kinds of value in texture, right? You could actually, if you took a different color pen, we could actually kind of go in and separate out different territories that have consistent coloration and make a whole map. This is probably, I would say, 25 different unique fields. Maybe we'll do that at the end. We'll kind of build one out and then go back in and show how the interference of these two ways of capturing this surface ends up producing a pretty complex and accurate representation of that surface. So I'm going to give this surface another shot. and then we're gonna jump over to the real one, and we're doing it live. As Bill O'Reilly is fond of screaming on a captured piece of audio that, I don't know, thinking that was kind of like America's indignity on display feels like a very quaint idea from an earlier, more innocent age. Because now we just live in a land of angry heads on the media. This is not talking about this is not helping this be a chill drawing stream, so we will just move right along from it. The aim here is to be something different than that media, to provide an alternative. So if you guys are watching, and I guess in the future, if people are able to review this and find some help in having kind of hanging out with me in a virtual experience of me working on the same projects over the course of days and weeks. I feel like I'm going to get a lot out of this footage when it's kind of compiled. I already know that the manner in which I'm speaking today is an improvement in clarity and in, you guys couldn't see that, but I had my hand really balled up. I always tense up when I'm drawing, and I have to keep remembering to lean back, sit up straight, not adopt like great posture in the Victorian style. Hey, we'll put some lights on, that'll probably make it easier to see what I'm doing. I'm not saying become suddenly the harshest critic of your own posture in order to stream. Right. But I've noticed that I'm improving. I've noticed that I'm using fewer filler words, that I am holding a conversation a little bit better, at least today. I don't know, maybe right now it sounds like I'm bragging. And folks, I don't mean to brag. The idea is that I am learning. This is instructive for me, even though I have no idea how many folks are listening or not listening, nor do I really care in these early days. Oh yeah, we're listening to the Free Music Archive, as usual. We're over on the New Age tracks. This has been an album called The Thread of Atmospheres by Maxim Kornishiev, and we're finishing that album up with Pulse. So shortly, we're going to have to switch the music up. That's going to be a little bit of an adventure. It's a little bit of an adventure every time we do it. I like using the Free Music Archive because I like using Creative Commons content and public domain content. I think that it's really important to become not just an advocate for the public domain, but a user of it, to really reference our public heritage and cite it and use it and remix it and use it as part of your own work in order to keep it alive and keep it going and keep it relevant. I'm not saying that every piece of media that's ever been produced in the past is relevant, but I guess what I am saying is that it is a giant well of material which is ours, right? It's a gift from our ancestors to us. It is the work that they have let go of because they're gone. And it is a gift that the whole world has inherited, and right now the whole world does not have great access to that gift. It's digital, it's locked up, it's not uh, cataloged and understood. The really cool parts of it haven't really been gone through and pulled back out and resurrected. There's a lot to be mined there. You know, it's a huge untapped resource that we just have not really even begun to use. And it's growing every day, you know. The public domain is a matter of law, and it's been settled for a while, and it has been artificially expanded. The term of copyright has been expanded to almost indefinite length by Congress at the will of the Disney Corporation, if no one else, and at the behest of the Disney Corporation, if no one else, which has led us to the sort of copyright strike strangeness of YouTube, because that law was a piece of concision. That was not, or not concision, conciliation, right? That was a regulatory capture. That was Congress was passed a law because Disney asked them to pass it, not because it was good for artists, not because it was a sensible way of thinking about the shared heritage of the country, but because Mickey Mouse needs to make money just for private people. Even though Walt Disney is dead, Walt Disney's money lives on and is wants to retain control. And that's weird, right? That's really weird. But on the other hand, we have all kinds of things that, all kinds of pieces of culture that the mouse doesn't own, you know, that really are free. Free as in beer, free as in speech, all of it, you know. Shakespeare. If you wanted to start printing copies of Shakespeare plays, no one's going to stop you. His estate won't. Everyone's free to do it. Everyone's free to reproduce and recreate Shakespeare and remix Shakespeare as much as anyone wants. And that's amazing. And I want that for much more recent things than Shakespeare. And I want to insist on that for much more recent things than Shakespeare, because I think that it's a useful way for society to move forward. I think it's important to be able to build on the past, and being able to just freely use the creative works that have come before, that the authors are long dead, and the ideas have permeated the culture as much as they're going to or not going to already. These orphans, you know, like, those pieces of art can live on. Those pieces of art can live on really directly, really indirectly, but by entering the public domain, they become part of the ecosystem of ideas that everyone in the whole world is entitled to draw from. And that idea, that very democratic idea, that this isn't just your heritage or my heritage, but that what the public domain is our heritage, our collective and shared heritage, and that it's our responsibility, and it's also our joy, you know. So that's why we're listening to the Free Music Archive. But if the music gets weird, that's because the Free Music Archive doesn't have good funding, and so it lacks an ability to actually kind of hold on to tracks and sort them out and do that inside the platform. And I'm not going to download Winamp again. I haven't downloaded Winamp in 15 years, you know. I got no time to have an MP3 collection again. That's an outdated way of thinking about music. I mean, it's not. And when the great spot apocalypse occurs, or what have you, here we're about to encounter a really interesting transition, because the weathering on this one panel is totally different than the weathering on this other panel. This might have been a replacement, or it might have just been a different batch of steel that got a lot rustier. But as you'll see, this is going to be almost entirely dark lines of corrugation. This pen is starting to deform, which is the way of these pens. And so I'm gonna have to switch to a new one soon. But there's no great worry there. I do sometimes worry about the ambient and electronica channels on the Free Music Archive. I feel like they might bring up... Well, I feel like a lot of them are DJ creations that may have a fair use amount of material from a copyrighted work. You know, a sample or a remix or just a little shout out. But it's just enough for YouTube's sort of audio gathering algorithms to decide that it's probably a copyright claim and kind of do that on behalf of whatever recording label has the original work from the 50s or 60s. So we've lost the thread. That was the end of that page. So now we're listening to Corwin Trails' Z is for Zamoni Pokron. This is on an album 93 EP. No idea. Okay. So, where are we? If you go down that corrugation line, we're there. We're right at the top left edge of this set of 6 windows here. And here, on this part of the photograph, we can see a phenomenon which I'm going to try to capture. Which is that not all of these corrugated steel sheets are properly installed. This one's slightly off from center. And so it's got a little bit of a divot and an edge to it. the intersection that I live next to in Pittsburgh has a whole bunch of different straightaways that come off of it in a bunch of different directions. And those straightaways are probably each a mile long, and you have a view of that mile from the intersection. And you have this light, which is a good 2 or 3 minute light that's stopping you. And that light is right outside my window. And so, when there are motorcyclists, sports car enthusiasts, anyone with a big engine that makes a lot of noise, who's driving that thing because they only drive to make a lot of noise and have a big engine. That's like the point of the driving. The noise is the point. The attention is the point. Man, this light enrages those folks, and they just peel out of here. So big engine noises always. Trucks, too. There's quite a lot of tractor-trailer traffic coming in off the highways and servicing all of the industrial activity that happens here in the Strip District in Pittsburgh. Even now, right? I mean, you might ask, like, what's going on down here? Well, only this week, I encountered a sign outside one of the fabrication shops that's here in the district that said, COVID-19 alert. We are a contractor that's important to the national defense and the defense industry, and we are obligated to keep, we're not just continuing to work, we're obligated to keep our normal work hours, right? Like, we have to just keep going because, like, they need this stuff. They need the whatever aluminum castings we're making. That's weird. Oh. Right. We dropped this step. Now we need to go back and do it. Yeah, we're 45 minutes in. I think all of the casuals have dropped off. Whoever's listening, whether you're listening concurrently with the broadcast of this, which would be some cool internet stuff, or whether you're listening in the future, or whether you're me in the future listening back to this like an egoist, an egomaniac. I'm gonna say egoist, like I'm a magician. Yeah, a magician of my own tiny cult. I love it. Yeah, anyway. I think all the casuals have left, so I can feel free to say this now. Absolutely, what we've been developing right here is a system to draw corrugation that means that we don't really have to, like, think super hard about achieving the results, because we picked a system that achieves pretty interesting results, kind of regardless of what the input is. As you saw on our test page over here, right, we could just make more rusty corrugated sidings. And that's part of what I'm trying to do here on the stream. Right? A really good friend of mine said once, never do anything for just one reason, right? If you can, try to do things for a whole bunch of good reasons, you know, and maybe a couple bad reasons too, but if you're going to do an activity, make sure that it's an activity that's rewarding in multiple different ways. Right? That's another way. That's a restatement of what my friend was saying to me. When you do an activity, make sure that that activity rewards you, provides a yield of energy, or new material that you've made, or work that you've produced, or relaxation that you have engendered, or whatever it is that you're seeking with that action. Make sure that when you take up an activity, that it's rewarding on multiple fronts and not just one. And I think that's just a practical thing. The things that are rewarding on exactly one front tend to just not be as good as actions that are rewarding on multiple fronts. So if you're able to, try to string together very holistic actions that both, nourish you and calm you down. Streaming that both, I guess, builds an audience, maybe builds a repository of old work, right? Like, this is definitely a record of my drawing process, my thought process, a little bit of my teaching style. It's a record, it's a time for experimentation, it's also very much a time for work. I'm going to sell this, this isn't just kind of a funsies thing. This is a piece of final production work. I mean, this isn't the final product, but this is production work. I'm doing it live in that sense. You guys are not witnessing a kind of artificial simulation of my artistic process. Like, this is the actual product that I'm working on. You're seeing me make it live. This is not kind of a bullet journal YouTube where it's maybe dubious that those bullet journals get filled in the rest of the month or followed, or that those folks are moving forward in their lives, rather than kind of making journal porn, which is fine. I mean, journal porn is journal porn, and like, everyone loves like productivity pornography, and kind of proficiency porn is, I think, what Neil Stephenson's novels were once referred to, especially his more recent ones, Seven Eves in particular. That the characters are world experts being backed up with the world's resources to solve impossible problems, and they go for it. And we just watch. So, is there a narrative? Doesn't really matter. Do we get page-long descriptions of how to use a glider on the Andes Mountains to get up into the high atmosphere and interact with some robots? Absolutely we do. Okay. Cool. Well, damn. We just powered right through that. The top and the sides. That is what we got next. And I already know how to kind of do the sides. I'm going to make one addition, which I think will be pretty good, which is on the inside. I'm just going to denote 1, 2, and then a third cross beams for this material to get riveted into. And this is absolutely the edge of the thing. Will I put ferns in here? I'm just gonna hint at them. And yeah, that's extremely tough to do. And so the way that I'm going to try to achieve it is to provide the texture of an incredible number of ferns and fern fronds overlapping each other and just filling this entire space. And the viewer and their imagination can fill in just how many plants must exist in order to accomplish this this level of kind of fern detail. And remembering the lessons that we learned on how to draw ferns a couple of streams ago, they can overlap. That's fine. These fronds and pinna are a system that produces quite a lot of translucency. And something that is lovely about ferns is that there's so much interesting overlap in a big group of ferns, the way that they all make complex patterns as they flow over each other. Right, and so just by kind of mixing our techniques up, this is very much filled up with ferns, and this is going to imply a level of background texture that we're going to have to support here, and so either by having a very light version of this, or by having more kind of grayscale, just on our scale over here, just a 1 or a 2 to fill in this background. It makes sense for this to feel very compressed and layered and dense all the way up to the ceiling because we're looking at the entire length of this box through this window. And so, of course, it can be absolutely full of ferns. And if you're asking about the little extra edges, the little kind of silicone filigree I'm putting on here, that, you guys should recall, oh, it's not real here. Right. Right, but that's the glass. That's the glass part of these Wardian cases. Because this whole thing is encased and not under pressure, but, well, I guess, yeah, it is under pressure in that it's sealed. It's a sealed environment, and there's gases being pumped in and out of it, transferring through it, and it is filtering those gases as it kind of that's what these ferns are here for, is to absorb different chemicals coming from different industrial processes that these fern banks have been set up to filter all that air as the process, you know, like parallel to the process and next to it somewhere else in the factory. And so they incidentally serve as walls between different sections of the factory where different productions or experiments or prototype build-outs or real build-outs are all occurring, and to give those heavy processes some noise space between them, some strong steel, some visual distance, and also some protection from debris, as is inevitable with a little bit of forward science. You always get a little bit of disastrous debris. They needed walls, so having ferns is a great way to accomplish two things at once in their new factory, right? This is their kind of coal processing, coal scrubbers, right? That you find at power plants and other steel plants. You know, this is the kind of processing stuff that occurs to keep their industrial pollution down. Alright, I'm going to leave that alone. That's probably too much. But, okay, I gotta stop. I gotta stop on that side. I like this less than this. I may just copy this digitally and put it here. Right. Oh, and the top, too. So the top is where people get to see that this is actually corrugated. Oh, and it's actually... I gotta tell you, it is very satisfying to see this assemble together. I know that we've been working on it on and off for quite a while now, and to just finish it out tonight is really cool. We've busted past an hour, so I have my own kind of internal permission outside of you guys to call this quits. Now that it's been an hour, whenever the spirit moves me. But it hasn't moved me yet. I'm interested to see how this is going to go when I get to the digitization of it. Whether it's going to be an easy process to turn it into its final form, or whether I'm going to have to come back and rethink some portions of it. I might have to rethink some portions of it. I don't know that this is all going to achieve the desired effect. Let's see. That one wasn't even really leaf-shaped. I don't know where I was going with that. Oh wow, I just realized I had my head like this close to the page. You can really see just how much pressure I put on these pens, right? The little divot in my finger there. Oh. My instinct as I draw is to slowly hunch up to get my eyes closer to the page, to hold the pen tighter, to really kind of lock down what I'm doing. And that doesn't make for excellent drawing. That makes for a really tired hand really fast. Tired shoulders, stiff neck, the whole deal. Sitting for a long time is not always great either. I should take a stand just for a couple minutes, but I'm going to do that after I just finish with this soil, and then that should be the whole thing. The kit, the caboodle, the whole. And my hope is by adding in this background on this interior side, but at a much lighter, maybe just a 1 or a 2 over here, then we'll end up with a really nice looking kind of final product, final piece. Here I'm just going back in and kind of adding some of the tops of some of these very prominent ferns. Just kind of differentiate them. Cool. Okay, I'm not gonna mess with it tomorrow. I'm gonna call this done. This is great. April 4th. Jesus. What time is it? Alright, it's April 19th. Wow, okay, so we took our time with this one. We hopped to some other projects and hopped back. Did a lot of warm-up, but I think this looks great. I'm gonna digitize this. I'm gonna make it up and I'm gonna see what it's like, see if I like it. I think it's pretty cool. I can already see now that it's going to print up really nicely and be a cool looking thing once it's all folded up. So maybe we'll get to that next stream and we'll start another project and talk a little bit more about other cool art info. This is Connor in Pittsburgh, I guess signing off. Have a great night.